The church bell had long since stopped ringing, but its echo still clung to the air like a cruel reminder of what should have been the happiest day of her life. She stood alone on the steps, her white dress clinging to her body as the rain poured mercilessly from the gray heavens above. The lace veil that had been so carefully pinned in her hair now sagged, heavy with water, its edges plastered against her pale cheeks. What had once been a symbol of purity, of hope, of a fresh beginning, now felt like a shroud marking her humiliation. Her groom, her promised protector, her would-be husband was gone. Whispers had traveled fast inside the church, spreading like wildfire. He ran. Some said he had bolted through the back door, others that he had been seen mounting his horse, galloping away without so much as a backward glance. Regardless of the details, the truth was undeniable. He had abandoned her, left her standing there in front of a room full of townspeople who had come to witness a union, not a scandal. The stares had been unbearable. Pity in some eyes, scorn in others. Murmured words stung her ears as she stood frozen, unable to move. "Poor girl," someone whispered. "Shameful," another hissed. She had wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but her legs had carried her only as far as the threshold of the church. And now, hours later, she found herself outside in the open, the rain soaking her through, the streets empty as night began to fall. Clutching the small bundle she had brought with her, a change of clothes, a ribbon from her mother, a keepsake handkerchief, she took a hesitant step into the muddy road. The wedding shoes, once gleaming white, squelched in the muck, each step heavier than the last. Where was she supposed to go? Back home, where her family had warned her against this match? To the inn, where gossip would spread faster than fire on dry grass? No, she couldn't face any of them. Her chest tightened as the weight of it all pressed down on her. She had been raised to believe marriage was her safety, her future, her rightful place in the world. And in one cowardly act, that future had been ripped from her hands. What was left for her now? A girl branded unwanted before she had even begun her life as a wife. The thought cut deep, and she bit her lip hard to keep from crying out. She pulled her veil from her head, crumpling it in her fists. The fabric tore slightly, a jagged sound that mingled with the patter of rain. She had imagined this veil floating gracefully down as she walked the aisle, imagined her husband lifting it to kiss her. Now it was nothing but a useless rag, drenched and tattered, mirroring the ruin of her dreams. With a frustrated sob, she stuffed it into her bundle and pressed onward. The town was quiet, shuttered windows and locked doors lining the street. Lanterns flickered in a few places, casting weak glows through the mist, but no one came out to look at her. If they did, they pretended not to see. She could feel their judgment even behind the wood and glass, as though the whole town had decided she was cursed. Her steps carried her past the edge of town, where the road thinned into dirt and fields stretched wide. The rain made the world blurry, but she didn't mind. Perhaps it was better not to see too clearly when your heart had been broken so cruelly. Her dress dragged behind her, gathering mud, the once proud white fading into brown and gray. Still, she pressed forward, her mind numb. Her spirit raw. Each step was a battle, not just against the mud and the cold, but against the voice inside her whispering she was worthless, unwanted, discarded. She thought of her mother, now long gone, and the gentle words she might have spoken. "You're stronger than this. Keep walking." So she did. The road seemed endless, yet the silence was a strange comfort. No one to laugh. No one to pity. Just the rain and her own breath. She did not know where she was going, only that she could not stay. And perhaps, in some unspoken way, the rain was washing her clean, stripping away the last remnants of the bride she had been that morning, leaving only a woman who would have to find a new beginning. But as she trudged into the gathering darkness, she had no idea that her fate was about to change. That someone small, with freckles and bright, innocent eyes was waiting just beyond the rain to see her not as broken, but as something wondrous. The rain had not relented. It drummed against the earth in steady sheets, turning the dirt road into streams of mud and filling the night with a ceaseless rhythm. The bride, still shivering, still wandering with no true destination, spotted a leaning barn on the edge of an overgrown pasture. Its roof sagged in places. The wood blackened with age and damp, but it was shelter. And shelter was all she could ask for. She ducked inside, brushing wet strands of hair from her face, clutching her bundle close. The interior smelled of damp straw and old timber. A few bales sat collapsed in a corner, and a hole in the roof let thin rivulets of water stream down, pooling in the dirt floor. It was no sanctuary, but at least it gave her a brief respite from the storm. She lowered herself onto a bale, her gown clinging to her body, and let out a shaky breath. For the first time since the church, she felt her tears break free. They mingled with the rain still dripping from her lashes, but these were not the silent tears of humiliation she had held back before the townsfolk. These were heavier, raw sobs that shook her chest, wrung from the depths of her broken heart. Her whole life had narrowed into this moment. Alone, abandoned, a bride without a groom. She pressed her face into her hands, muffling the sound. That was why she didn't notice at first. A faint shuffle, a creak of the wooden door, a presence. When she finally looked up, she froze. A pair of wide, curious eyes were watching her from the barn's threshold. The eyes belonged to a little girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, barefoot, with tangled red hair that framed a small face scattered with freckles. She clutched a ragged doll in one arm, its fabric worn nearly to threads, its button eyes loose. The girl looked at her as though she were something marvelous, something unreal. The bride quickly wiped her tears, straightening, suddenly self-conscious. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice hushed, cracked from crying. The child took a hesitant step inside, her bare feet leaving little prints in the mud. She tilted her head, studying the soaked figure in white before her. Then, almost in a whisper, she breathed words that seemed to hang in the damp air like a miracle. "You came from heaven?" The bride blinked, stunned into silence. For a moment she could only stare. A laugh, half sob, half breath escaped her lips. Heaven? Was that what the girl saw? Not a forsaken bride, not a woman discarded, but some angel sent down into the storm? The little girl's expression was one of pure awe, her wide eyes glowing in the dim light. "You look like one," she added softly, hugging her doll closer. "With your white dress. Papa told me angels wear white." The bride's heart, still bruised and raw, felt a flicker of warmth. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone to see her as something other than broken. This child, with her innocent certainty, had given her a gift hope, however fragile. She managed a small smile. "No, sweetheart, I'm no angel. Just a woman who lost her way." But the girl only shook her head stubbornly, her wet curls bouncing. "Angels get lost too. That's why they find people like me." The bride felt her throat tighten. She wanted to ask, "Like you?" But she bit back the words, sensing something lonely in the child's voice. Instead, she knelt, her dress dragging in the wet straw, and extended a hand. "What's your name?" The girl beamed, as though she'd been waiting for the question. "Clara." "Well, Clara," the bride whispered, "I'm very glad you found me." The girl's hand slipped into hers small, warm despite the cold night, and for the first time that evening, the bride felt anchored, tethered to something more than her sorrow. Clara tugged gently, pulling her toward the doorway. "Come on," she urged. "Papa won't mind if you come with me. You need to be inside, not in a barn. I'll show you." The bride hesitated. Go with a stranger? What if the father was angry? But then she looked into Clara's freckled face, those earnest eyes brimming with trust, and her heart softened. What choice did she have? Alone, she had nowhere to go. With Clara, perhaps there was a chance of warmth, of safety, of something she had lost that morning, belonging. She rose slowly, clutching her bundle once more. The rain still fell outside, but it no longer felt as hostile as before. With Clara's small fingers gripping hers, she stepped back into the storm, guided by a child who believed she had come from heaven. And in that moment, the bride began to wonder if perhaps heaven had sent her, not for herself, but for this little girl. The path Clara led her down wound through a patch of woods, the rain dripping steadily from branches overhead. The bride clutched her bundle tightly, her gown heavy with water, yet she kept walking, guided by the child's small, determined hand. Clara moved with the confidence of someone who knew these woods well, hopping over roots and puddles without fear. The bride, however, stumbled more than once, her shoes sinking into the soft earth, but Clara would glance back each time with an encouraging grin, as if to say, "You can make it. You're with me now." After what felt like an endless trudge, a cabin came into view. It was small, weathered by years of wind and rain, with smoke curling faintly from a crooked chimney. A lantern glowed in one window, flickering against the storm's darkness. To the abandoned bride, it looked like a beacon. Shelter, warmth, perhaps even safety. Clara dashed up the wooden steps, her little feet leaving muddy prints. She pushed the door open without hesitation, calling into the dim light, "Papa! Papa, I found someone!" The bride lingered at the threshold, her breath caught in her chest. Inside, the cabin was simple but tidy: a table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, shelves lined with jars of preserves. It felt lived in, cared for, though marked by a sense of quietness that only a man and child might leave behind. From the back corner, a tall figure rose. He moved into the lamplight, and the bride's heart skipped. The man, Clara's father, was broad-shouldered and rugged, with a face weathered by years of toil. His shirt sleeves were rolled, revealing strong forearms, and his dark hair fell untamed across his brow. His eyes, sharp and cautious, fixed immediately on the stranger standing wet and bedraggled in his doorway. "What's this?" he asked, his voice low, wary. His gaze flicked from the bride's ruined gown to her trembling hands, then back to Clara. "Clara, who is this woman?" Clara clutched her doll to her chest and announced proudly, "She's an angel, Papa. She came from heaven in the rain." The man's brows knit together, a shadow of confusion and disbelief crossing his face. "Angel?" He looked at the bride again, this time more searchingly. She wanted to speak, to explain, but her throat tightened, the weight of shame pressing down on her once more. "I'm not," she began softly, her voice cracking. She swallowed, then tried again. "I'm not an angel, just a woman who needed somewhere to go. I didn't mean to trouble you." The man's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "Trouble finds this place often enough. We don't invite it in." Clara stepped forward, her little hands balled into fists. "Papa, she's cold. She's wet. She can't stay out there. Please?" Her freckled face looked up at him, earnest and pleading. For a long moment, silence hung between them. The rain pattered on the roof, the stove crackled softly, and the bride's heart thudded in her chest. She knew she could not bear being cast out again, not tonight. Finally, with a reluctant sigh, the man stepped aside. "One night," he said firmly. "Just one. After that, we'll see." Clara squealed in delight, tugging the bride inside. The warmth of the cabin enveloped her immediately, the scent of wood smoke and stew filling her senses. She lowered her bundle onto the floor, unsure whether to sit or stand. Uncertain under the man's piercing gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. Though the words felt too small for the relief washing over her, the man gave a curt nod, then busied himself at the stove, ladling stew into a bowl. He set it on the table, gesturing toward it. "Eat, you look half-starved." She hesitated, her pride warring with hunger, but Clara tugged her sleeve. "Go on, Papa makes the best stew." At last she sat. The spoon trembled in her hand, and the first mouthful nearly brought tears to her eyes, not from sadness this time, but from gratitude. It had been so long since she had tasted kindness. As she ate, Clara chattered happily, telling her about the woods, her doll, and the way the stars looked when the sky was clear. The bride listened, smiling faintly, her heart easing with each word. But every so often, her eyes met the father's across the table. His gaze remained guarded, his silence thick. She could sense the questions he held back. "Who are you? What are you running from? Why did you come here?" And though she had no answers she was ready to give, a small spark ignited within her. Perhaps in this lonely cabin, something new could begin. For now, though, she was only a stranger in a wedding dress, taken in by a little girl who believed she had fallen from heaven. The following days unfolded like the slow unfurling of a fragile blossom, hesitant at first, but gaining warmth with each passing moment. The bride woke each morning in the small loft above the cabin's main room, where Clara had insisted she sleep. The bed was little more than a straw mattress with a quilt patched in places, but to the woman who had stood in the rain with nowhere to go, it felt like heaven itself. At dawn, she would stir awake to the smell of wood smoke and the sound of Clara's chatter below. The girl's voice carried a brightness that filled every corner of the cabin, chasing away the silence that had once lived there. "Papa, can we have pancakes today?" she would ask. Or, "Papa, can we take Angel?" That was what Clara had started calling the bride, to the meadow. Each word was threaded with excitement, as though having the bride there had turned ordinary days into something extraordinary. The woman, still unsure if she belonged, found herself slowly drawn into their routine. She began to help with chores, sweeping the wooden floor, mending Clara's torn dresses, and even stirring pots of stew when the father, his name she learned was Elias, tended to the woodpile outside. Her hands, accustomed to more delicate tasks, grew steadier with each chore, grounding her in the rhythm of cabin life. Clara, delighted by her presence, followed her everywhere. She peppered her with questions, sometimes so many that the bride could only laugh. "Why is your hair so shiny? Did the rain wash it clean? Can you sew like Mama used to? Will you read to me?" That last question tugged at the bride's heart. "Do you have books?" she asked softly. Clara's eyes lit up. She scrambled to a shelf and pulled out a tattered book with worn edges. "Papa taught me some words, but I want to know more." So in the evenings, by the fire's glow, the bride began to teach Clara to read properly. She would sound out the words, her little finger tracing the letters, while the bride gently corrected her. Sometimes Elias would sit nearby, sharpening tools or mending tack, his quiet presence a steady counterbalance to Clara's laughter. Though he rarely spoke, the bride often caught him watching, his expression unreadable. One night, Clara climbed into her lap, curling against her like a kitten, and whispered, "You feel like Mama." The words nearly broke her. She wrapped her arms around the girl, holding her close, though tears pricked her eyes. She had lost so much in a single day, but here, in Clara's innocent love, she was finding something she hadn't even known she needed. Still, Elias remained cautious. Though he no longer looked at her as though she were an intruder, he guarded his words, measuring them carefully. His silence sometimes unnerved her, but she sensed that behind it lay wounds of his own losses and burdens he carried quietly, perhaps too heavy to speak aloud. Yet, slowly, the walls between them began to shift. She noticed it in the way he would leave an extra portion of stew for her without asking, or how he set aside firewood so she wouldn't have to struggle with it herself. He said little, but his actions spoke. One afternoon, while Clara napped, she stepped outside to gather water from the well. The air was crisp, the rain finally gone, and the woods smelled of pine and damp earth. Elias was there, chopping wood, his axe swinging with practiced rhythm. She paused, watching him, unsure whether to interrupt. He glanced up, catching her stare. For a moment their eyes held. Then, without a word, he drove the axe into the block and leaned on the handle. "You've been good with Clara," he said at last. His voice was gruff but softer than she had heard before. She lowered her gaze, her cheeks warming. "She's a wonderful child. She makes it easy." His silence lingered, but when she finally dared to look up again, there was something different in his eyes, not suspicion, not judgment, but a flicker of trust. That night, Clara insisted they all eat together at the table, her small hands clasped around theirs as she bowed her head to say grace. The bride, who had once prayed for rescue in the rain, now whispered her thanks, not for the life she had lost, but for the strange new one unfolding before her. And though the past still haunted her, in that quiet cabin, with Clara's innocent laughter and Elias's watchful presence, she felt the first fragile stirrings of healing. The peace of the cabin did not last unbroken. For a few golden weeks, the bride, though still haunted by memories of her ruined wedding day, found herself woven into Clara's daily life. She began to laugh again, began to feel as though perhaps her story was not over. Yet, in small towns and tight-knit communities, secrets do not stay buried long. Whispers carry on the wind, and rain-washed roads lead both comfort and trouble to every doorstep. It began with a knock on the cabin door. A neighbor, Mrs. Haskins, came by with a basket of eggs. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, falling on the woman seated by the hearth with Clara in her lap. The older woman's lips pressed thin. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said. Her voice, laced with meaning, got the bride stiffened, her cheeks burning. She lowered her gaze, but Mrs. Haskins wasn't done. "I heard about the wedding," she added in a whisper that carried like thunder. "The poor dear, left standing alone in the church. Folk in town are still talking. Such a shame." Clara, not understanding the sting of those words, only smiled and offered the woman a doll's curtsy. But the bride felt the wound reopen, raw and stinging. After Mrs. Haskins left, she sat in silence, fighting tears. Elias noticed, his dark eyes narrowing. He didn't ask, not then, but she knew he had heard. The whispers grew louder. Each time she dared to go into town for flour, for cloth, she felt the stares, the murmurs, unwanted, abandoned, cursed. The words clung to her like shadows. Shopkeepers gave polite smiles but too quick glances, as if pitying her, or worse, mocking her behind her back. One afternoon, as she walked out of the general store with Clara, she heard a familiar voice, one that turned her blood cold. It was the voice of her former groom. He was leaning against a post, his hat tipped back, his smirk cruel. "Well, if it isn't the runaway bride," he sneered. "How's life treating you, darling? Find yourself a new fool yet?" The crowd chuckled nervously, no one daring to step between them. Her face burned hot with shame, but before she could answer, Clara tugged fiercely at her hand. "Don't talk to her like that," the girl shouted, freckles bright against her flushed cheeks. "She's my mama from heaven." The square fell silent. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The bride froze, stunned by Clara's declaration. Her heart swelled and ached all at once. But the man only laughed, cruel and sharp. "Mama from heaven?" More like trash left at the altar. Before the bride could crumble under the insult, another voice cut through the air. Deep, steady, commanding. Elias Dodd, he had come into town with his wagon and now stood just behind her, towering and unyielding. His jaw was set, his eyes like flint. "That's enough," he said. The groom sneered. "This your charity case, Elias? Careful. Folk might think you've lost your wits." But Elias didn't flinch. He stepped forward, placing himself firmly between the bride and her tormentor. "You call yourself a man?" he asked quietly, though the steel in his tone carried across the square. "Leaving a woman to face the world alone, then mocking her for surviving it? You don't deserve the dirt on her shoes." Murmurs rippled again, this time different: approval, respect. The crowd's eyes shifted, no longer condemning her, but condemning the man who had abandoned her. The groom muttered something under his breath and slunk away, the smirk gone from his face. The tension eased, though the bride still trembled. Elias turned then, his hand brushing lightly against her arm, not possessive, not forceful, but steadying. "Let's go," he said simply, guiding her and Clara back to the wagon. On the ride home, Clara chattered happily, as if proud of herself for speaking up. The bride, though quiet, felt something stir deep inside her. For the first time since the rain-soaked night of her humiliation, she did not feel powerless. She felt defended, seen. Back at the cabin, Elias busied himself with the horses, but she couldn't let the moment slip away unspoken. She stepped toward him, her voice soft but resolute. "Thank you." He looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he gave a small nod. "No one deserves to be shamed for surviving," he said. Those words sank into her heart like seeds in fertile soil. And as the firelight later flickered across the cabin walls, with Clara nestled between them, the bride realized something had shifted. Her past had tried to claim her, but here in this cabin, with this man and child, she had found the strength to face it, and perhaps, she dared to hope, a future too. The dawn came quietly, brushing the sky with pink and gold as though heaven itself had chosen to bless the small homestead. For the first time in weeks, the air smelled of promise instead of despair. The virgin bride, now no longer just a fragile figure in wet silk, but a woman reborn in the warmth of acceptance, opened her eyes to the sound of laughter echoing from the yard. It was the little freckled girl twirling barefoot in the dew, her laughter carrying a melody so pure that it seemed to stitch the broken pieces of the bride's heart together. The bride stood at the threshold, her hair loose and touched by sunlight. She remembered how just days ago she had been abandoned in the rain, discarded like something unworthy. But now, as she watched the child spin with delight, she felt as if she had been placed exactly where she belonged. That whisper the girl had spoken, "You came from heaven?" echoed again in her mind. At first, it had pierced her like a cruel irony. Yet now, the more she thought of it, the more it felt like truth. Maybe she had indeed been sent here not for her own sake, but to be the missing piece of this broken little family. The rancher, standing a few steps away, leaned against the fence, his gaze quietly fixed on her. He wasn't a man of many words, but his eyes held a kind of reverence, as though he was afraid that if he spoke too loudly, she might vanish like a dream. For years he had walked with silence as his only companion, burdened by losses too heavy to speak of. But now, in the bride's presence, that silence began to feel less like a curse and more like a gentle space where something sacred could grow. The morning stretched on, filled with small acts that stitched them closer together. She helped him with breakfast, fumbling at first, still unsure of her place. He guided her quietly, not commanding, but showing his large hand steady beside hers, his movements slow and patient. The child, seated at the wooden table, watched them with wide eyes, as if seeing a miracle take place in front of her. She giggled when the bride burned the bread slightly, and the rancher surprised them both by letting out a rare laugh, deep and warm, that filled the kitchen like sunlight dot as the day passed. The bride found herself learning the rhythm of this new life. She fetched water, fed the chickens with the little girl, and even mended one of the rancher's worn shirts by the firelight. Each task was simple, yet to her they were holy, because they gave her something she had long been denied: belonging. The house, once silent and worn with grief, began to breathe again. There was music in the creak of the wooden floorboards, warmth in the crackle of the hearth, and laughter stitched into the rafters. Yet, as night approached, a quiet fear crept into her heart. Could this truly last? Would the world, cruel as it had always been, come to snatch this fragile happiness away? She sat by the fire, her hands clasped tightly, afraid to ask aloud what her heart longed for. The rancher seemed to sense her unease. He sat down beside her, his silence not heavy, but steadying. Slowly he reached out, placing his hand gently over hers. She looked up, startled, meeting his steady gaze. "You're safe here," he said finally, his voice low but firm, as though the words were a vow carved in stone. The bride's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of release. Safe. It was a word she had never truly known, but now it wrapped around her like a cloak. The little girl climbed into her lap then, resting her freckled face against her chest. "See?" she whispered drowsily, her words half laced with sleep. "I told you. You came from heaven." The bride kissed the child's forehead, holding her close. For the first time in her life, she did not protest, did not doubt. Perhaps heaven wasn't a place above the clouds. Perhaps heaven was here, in this weathered home with laughter blooming in the corners, in the steady strength of the man beside her, and in the innocent trust of the little girl who had chosen her as family dot as the fire dimmed and the stars spread across the night sky. The bride, the rancher, and the child sat together, three souls once broken, now bound. They were no longer alone, no longer wandering. They had found what the storm had tried to wash away: love, safety, and a home dot, and so the virgin bride, once left in the rain, discovered that sometimes heaven does not send angels with wings, it sends a child with freckles, a silent man with a steady heart and a second chance to belong.